The afternoon sun filtered softly through the large airport windows, washing the waiting lounge in a calm golden glow. People hurried around with bags and coffee cups, their voices mixing into a busy hum. Among them sat a quiet young girl, maybe 17 or 18, her dark hair tied neatly into a ponytail. She wore a plain hoodie, blue jeans, and a pair of old sneakers. Her boarding pass read, Seat 12F. Her name was Amelia Hart. She looked like any other passenger, ordinary, calm, lost in her own thoughts. But there was something different in her eyes. They held a quiet focus as if she was always thinking 2 steps ahead of everyone else. When the boarding call echoed through the speakers, she stood up, adjusted her backpack, and walked toward the gate with a light, steady stride as she found her seat near the window. She smiled politely at the elderly man who was seated beside her. He was a retired Air Force veteran named Colonel James Porter, on his way to visit his daughter. He noticed the small silver wings pinned discreetly on the strap of Amelia's backpack. They weren't just decoration. They were the kind that cadets earned after months of flight training. He smiled. "You like airplanes, young lady?" he asked kindly. Amelia nodded with a shy grin. "Yes, sir. I guess you could say I've spent a lot of time around them." He chuckled. "That's a fine thing. You know, I used to fly jets myself back in my day." Amelia's eyes brightened a little. "Fighter jets?" "F-15s, he said proudly, leaning back in his seat. "Old birds now, but they could dance through the clouds like nothing else." Amelia listened with respect. She didn't say much, but every word the colonel spoke made her smile. The engines roared as the plane began to taxi, and soon they were climbing into a sea of soft white clouds. The colonel glanced sideways, noticing how calm Amelia was, even when the plane shook lightly. Most young passengers would grip their seats or look nervous, but not her. She sat quietly, eyes fixed outside, breathing evenly like someone who knew the sky very well. When the flight attendant came by to serve drinks, she paused briefly and smiled warmly at Amelia. "Safe flight, call sign Sparrow," she whispered gently before moving on. The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Call sign?" he repeated curiously. "Did she just call you Sparrow?" Amelia hesitated for a second, then gave a small awkward smile. "It's just a nickname," she said softly. But it wasn't just a nickname. A few months earlier, Amelia had been part of a special air cadet training program run by the Air Force. She wasn't a pilot, not yet, but she had an extraordinary gift. From a very young age, Amelia could memorize flight systems and emergency procedures as easily as some kids learned songs. Her father, an Air Force engineer, had always told her, "The sky listens to those who respect it." He used to bring her to the base, letting her sit in old cockpits, showing her how every switch had a purpose, every sound a meaning. But then tragedy struck. During a high-altitude test flight, her father's aircraft suffered a malfunction. The mission failed and he never came home. Amelia was just 15. That day her world went quiet, but she never turned away from the sky. Instead, she promised herself that she would honor him by learning everything she could about the aircraft he loved. Within 2 years, she was part of a communication team that supported F-22 pilot training sessions. Her job was to monitor flight data and provide real-time feedback to pilots during simulated or live exercises. Her voice became known for its clarity and calm. She spoke with the precision of someone twice her age. When pilots lost orientation or faced sudden equipment glitches, her voice guided them back safely every time. They didn't know who she was or how young she was. They just knew her call sign, Sparrow. Her guidance saved not 1 but 2 F-22s during a live test mission gone wrong. The jets had lost radar and navigation over rough weather. The control room went silent except for the steady voice of Sparrow. She analyzed wind vectors and guided them with exact coordinates, her tone never shaking. Both aircraft landed safely. The pilots asked later, "Who is Sparrow?" But her identity remained hidden for security reasons. To them, she was just a voice, a guardian angel somewhere in the system. Now, months later, she sat quietly in seat 12F, looking out at the same kind of clouds those jets once flew through. The colonel beside her tried to make small talk, but Amelia was lost in thought. She still replayed the last flight she guided, still heard the faint echo of the pilot's voice saying, "Thank you, Sparrow. You saved us." It didn't feel real. She wasn't a hero, just someone who did her job. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may experience a patch of turbulence ahead. Please fasten your seatbelts." The plane jolted slightly and a few passengers gasped. The colonel smiled. "Nothing to worry about. Happens all the time." Amelia smiled back but stayed alert. She could tell from the pitch of the engines that the aircraft was adjusting altitude. The shaking increased slightly. The flight attendants moved quickly, securing carts and checking belts. Through the window, Amelia could see dark clouds forming like thick smoke. A layer of storm was building faster than expected. Then came a sudden drop. The aircraft shuddered violently. People screamed. A cup of coffee spilled across the tray table. The colonel gripped the armrest tightly. Amelia's eyes darted to the wing. It was flexing but stable. The turbulence wasn't catastrophic, but it was severe. She could hear the engines fighting strong downdrafts. The flight attendant struggled to stay balanced. Without realizing it, Amelia began whispering softly to herself. "Pitch up. Maintain thrust. Reduce descent rate." Her calm voice steadied even her own nerves. A flight attendant nearby, pale and nervous, heard her and asked, "Do you know what's happening?" Amelia nodded. "It's a pressure pocket. We're passing through heavy shear winds. The pilots are probably trying to climb above the cloud layer. Tell them to adjust altitude to 36,000 feet if possible. It should be clearer there." The attendant stared at her, uncertain, but something in Amelia's calmness gave her confidence. She hurried to the cockpit to relay the message. Moments later, the aircraft began to climb again, the shaking slowly fading. Passengers started to breathe again. The colonel turned to Amelia, eyes wide. "How did you know that?" Amelia looked embarrassed. "I just studied a bit of flight science." He laughed softly in disbelief. "Studied? Young lady, you just gave an order like a pilot." She looked down, blushing slightly. "I've been around airplanes for as long as I can remember." After a few quiet minutes, the turbulence ended completely. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the cabin with warm light. The passengers clapped softly in relief. The captain's voice came again, steady and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've safely cleared the storm. Thank you for your patience." But when the plane landed, something unexpected happened. As soon as the doors opened, the crew stood near the exit, not in the usual line to say goodbye, but in formation. Two uniformed officers from the ground team waited just outside. The colonel noticed their formal stance and the salute they offered as Amelia stepped out. Confused, he turned to one of the attendants. "What's going on?" The attendant smiled quietly. "She's Sparrow, sir." The colonel froze. The name hit him like a wave. Every Air Force veteran had heard of Sparrow, the mysterious young voice who had guided pilots to safety. He looked out the window of the jet bridge and saw Amelia standing near the officers, saluting back humbly before walking away with her backpack. She didn't act like someone special. No pride, no fanfare, just quiet dignity. She waved politely at a small group of cadets who were waiting nearby. Then she disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a stunned cabin crew and a plane full of passengers who had no idea that a legend had just been sitting among them. Later that evening, as Colonel Porter sat in the airport lounge waiting for his next connection, he couldn't get her out of his mind. He searched her name online, Amelia Sparrow Hart. The headlines flashed, "Teen Cadet Guides F-22s to Safety During Training Emergency." There she was in a small photo, wearing her cadet uniform, smiling modestly, eyes full of quiet strength. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Seat 12F. I sat next to Sparrow." Somewhere above the clouds, an F-22 training mission was underway again. The pilots followed the same calm voice that once guided them, even though they now knew the face behind it. But for Amelia, it was just another day. She didn't chase recognition or glory. She simply loved the sky, and she knew her father would have been proud. That evening, as the sun set, she stood outside the terminal, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. A faint sound of jets echoed far above. She smiled softly. The sky had always been her second home, and even though she wasn't flying yet, she knew that one day she would. For now, being Sparrow was enough. In that quiet moment, she realized something powerful. Heroes don't always wear medals or fly the planes themselves. Sometimes they're just voices in the background, calm and unseen, making sure others come home safe. And as the wind brushed past her face, she looked up one last time and whispered, "Clear skies, Dad." The world didn't stop. People still walked by, Planes still took off and the sky still stretched endlessly above. But somewhere up there, two F-22 pilots remembered the voice that once guided them through a storm, and a retired colonel told a story about a girl in... A week after the flight incident, Amelia returned to her training academy. The morning was cool and a thin mist covered the runway. Her sneakers made soft sounds against the concrete as she walked past rows of aircraft glistening in the early sun. The world around her felt peaceful, but her heart still carried the memory of that turbulent flight, the screams, the shaking, and then the calm that followed when she trusted her instincts. She had not told anyone what really happened, not even her mentors. For her, it wasn't something to boast about. It was simply what she had to do. But news traveled fast, especially in the aviation world. Everyone was talking about the girl in seat 12F, who had helped the crew make crucial decisions during the turbulence. Reporters wanted interviews, cadets whispered her name in admiration, and even senior officers mentioned her with respect. Amelia didn't seek the spotlight. She kept her head low, focused on her studies, and spent most evenings in the simulator room, practicing emergency flight responses. She felt safest in that small, glowing room filled with screens that imitated the open skies. That's where she belonged, where her father's voice still seemed to echo in her heart, reminding her to stay calm and focused. One afternoon, as she adjusted her headset, her instructor, Captain Rivera, walked in with a thoughtful smile. "You've been busy, Sparrow," he said, using her call sign. She looked up in surprise. "Just practicing, sir." He folded his arms. "You've always been calm under pressure, but now it seems you've become famous for it. Do you know what people are calling you outside?" Amelia shook her head. "I try not to read much online." Rivera chuckled softly. "They're calling you the voice in the storm. The pilots from that diverted flight gave statements saying a young girl guided them through chaos. Sound familiar?" Her cheeks flushed. "I was just trying to help, sir." "That's all?" He nodded slowly. "That's exactly why you stand out. You don't chase credit, you just do what's right." Before Amelia could respond, an assistant entered the room and handed Captain Rivera a folder. He scanned it, smiled, and turned to Amelia. "You might want to prepare yourself. We've got visitors, F-22 pilots. 2 of them. They've requested to meet Sparrow in person." Amelia froze. The words hit her harder than she expected. "The same pilots?" she whispered. "The very same," Rivera confirmed. "They're flying in today." By noon, the base buzzed with excitement. Cadets gathered near the runway fence, curious about the visitors. 2 sleek F-22 Raptors descended gracefully from the clouds, their engines roaring like thunder before softening into silence as they rolled to a stop. The pilots climbed out, tall and composed, their flight suits gleaming in the sunlight. Amelia watched from a distance, her heart racing. These were the men she had guided months ago during the training emergency. She had only ever heard their voices through a headset, never seen their faces. Now they were walking straight toward her. Captain Rivera called her over, Cadet Hart front and center. She took a deep breath and walked across the tarmac. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her step steady. The first pilot, Major Cole Anderson, smiled as he removed his helmet. "You must be Sparrow," he said warmly. Amelia nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." The second pilot, Captain Reed, looked amazed. "You're just a kid," he said softly, but not in a condescending way, more like disbelief. "You were the voice that kept us alive that day?" Amelia lowered her gaze. "I was on communication duty, sir. I only did what I was trained to do." Anderson exchanged a look with Rivera, then back at her. "What you did wasn't just training. You kept your head when others might have panicked. You gave us a chance to make it home." Before she could say anything, both men stood straight and saluted her. The air around them went silent. Every cadet nearby stopped to watch as 2 combat pilots, men who had thousands of flight hours, saluted a teenage girl. Amelia's throat tightened. She hesitated for a moment, then raised her hand and returned the salute. It was a moment she would never forget. Afterward, they all gathered in the Academy's meeting hall. The pilots shared stories from their missions, and Amelia listened with awe. They spoke about the day of the incident, the storm, the lost instruments, the static on the comms, and how a calm, young voice named Sparrow had guided them through it all. Major Anderson turned to the cadets. "Sometimes heroes don't wear medals. Sometimes they sit behind a console watching radar screens, using nothing but their knowledge and courage. Sparrow here taught us that. the hall filled with soft applause. Amelia felt overwhelmed but grateful. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly seen, not for being a prodigy or a name in a report, but for being someone who cared deeply about keeping others safe. In the weeks that followed, Amelia was invited to speak at different cadet programs. She didn't like public attention, but she agreed because she wanted to inspire others like her, young dreamers who thought they were too small to make a difference. She spoke in simple words, telling her story honestly. "I was scared," she admitted to one group. "But fear doesn't mean you stop. It means you care enough to keep going." Her humility touched everyone who heard her. Months later, she received a letter from the Air Force Command. It wasn't a medal or a certificate, it was an invitation. She was being offered an early entry into the Aviation Systems program, a rare opportunity for someone her age. Her mother cried when she read the letter. Amelia just smiled quietly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The first day she reported for advanced training, she walked through the same hangar her father used to work in. His old photo still hung on the wall among the engineers who had served with honor. She stood before it for a long moment, whispering, "I hope you're proud, Dad." Training was tough. There were long nights, complex systems, and endless drills. But Amelia never complained. She studied harder than ever, earning respect from even the toughest instructors. They admired her discipline, her teamwork, and the calm way she handled pressure. Sometimes late at night she would walk out onto the runway and gaze at the stars. She still used her call sign Sparrow during training simulations. Pilots trusted her voice instinctively, knowing it belonged to someone who would never let fear take control. One evening, as she finished a long day of work, she received a message from Major Anderson. He wrote, "You once guided us through a storm. Now it's our turn to watch your back. Keep flying, Sparrow. The sky is waiting." That message became her motivation. She framed it on her desk as a reminder that even small voices can echo far beyond what they imagine. Years passed, and Amelia grew into one of the most respected communication officers in her field. She wasn't a child anymore. She was calm, confident, and wise beyond her years. Pilots often said they felt safer when they heard her on the radio. She had become a symbol of composure and precision in the Air Force. One quiet afternoon, she boarded a commercial flight again, heading home after completing an advanced aviation seminar. As fate would have it, her seat number once again was 12F. She smiled at the coincidence and settled into her seat. The flight took off smoothly, and she gazed out the window at the vast sky she had grown to love even more. The world below looked small, but her memories filled the space around her. The veterans she'd met years ago, the pilots who saluted her, and her father's voice whispering in her heart. Halfway through the flight, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you look to your right, you'll see two F-22 Raptors escorting us for a short distance. It's part of a demonstration flight." Amelia turned her head quickly and saw them, two shining jets gliding beside the passenger plane. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized their maneuver pattern instantly. It was the same formation Major Anderson and Captain Reed used during their joint missions. The jets flew closer, their wings leveling with the commercial aircraft. Suddenly, one of them tilted slightly, dipping its wing in a gentle salute, a pilot's way of saying hello. The intercom crackled softly and a familiar voice came through, directed only to the cabin crew. But the message was short and clear, relayed to her through the captain moments later. "Good evening, Sparrow. We've got your 6. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand against the window, smiling through the reflection. The same sky that once tested her now seemed to embrace her. She wasn't that quiet girl in seat 12F anymore. She was Sparrow, the voice that once guided the storm, now guiding others to calm skies. The passengers around her didn't know who she was. To them, she was just a young woman on a plane. But to those in the air, to those who once owed their lives to her steady voice, she was a legend. As the jets peeled away into the distance, Amelia whispered softly, "Safe flight, my friends." The sun began to set beyond the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. The engines hummed softly as the plane continued its journey, cutting smoothly through the fading light. Amelia leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and smiled. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that her story wasn't just about airplanes or call signs. It was about courage, compassion, and believing that even the smallest voice can make a difference. And as the world below turned to twilight, the sky above remained endless and free, just like the heart of the girl who once sat in C at 12F and became Sparrow, the legend of the skies.